The Children of Dawn, written by Second Hogo. In the forgotten gulf of centuries, in that twilight realm where memory falters and history refuses to tread, there lived a rumor of a war unlike any other. The chronicles of kings are filled with banners and treaties, with victories sung and defeats lamented. But this tale? This was no war of crowns, nor of empire, nor even of faith as men know faith. It was a war of shadows against dawn, of silence against song, of iron against the frailty of human hearts. And though the dust of ages has swallowed the names of those who fought, their echoes remain like a wound in the earth itself. It began with a procession. From the west, beyond the forests where the sun dyes blood red, came pilgrims in tattered robes. They bore upon their breasts crosses wrought not of silver or gold, but of black iron, scorched and unholy. Their chants were low, like the drone of bees, yet each syllable struck the ear as though uttered by stones grinding against each other. Where they passed, wells curdled, harvests blackened, and children woke screaming with no cause. The air about them thickened, as if the very sky abhorred their passage. At their head walked a figure no man dared to name, clad in armor dull as ash, his face hidden behind a mask carved from bone. He was called the Veiled One. He carried no banner, spoke no word, yet those who gazed upon him felt as though their souls had been weighed and found wanting. Some whispered he was the chosen of a god older than creation, a deity of silence who demanded not worship, but surrender. Others swore he was no man at all, but the restless ghost of a fallen angel seeking dominion over the earth. Villages fell without the swing of a sword. At the sight of the black crosses, men abandoned their plows, women hid their infants, and priests forgot their prayers. For the Veiled One's followers were not soldiers in the manner of flesh and blood. They were revenants, their eyes hollow, their voices empty. When slain, their corpses bled no red, but a thick and dark ichor, and within hours crows gathered in thousands, pecking and tearing until the dead stood once more among the living. And so the Crusade of the Black Crosses was born. Yet against shadow there must always rise a flicker of light. In the Valley of Ysoria, where the rivers wound like silver threads through fertile meadows, lived a people simple and unprepared for war. Their days were filled with toil, their nights with prayer, and their faith was gentle, like the dawn upon dew. Among them was a farmer's son named Elias, broad of shoulder but gentle of manner, who dreamed not of glory but of peace. Yet in his breast there burned a stubborn flame, the refusal to bow to fear. When word came that the black crosses approached, Elias saw neighbors abandon their homes, priests burn their holy books rather than let them be defiled. But his mother, a woman stern and unyielding, told him, "If we flee, we die as cowards. If we stand, perhaps the dawn will remember us." And so Elias took up an axe not meant for war, but for wood, and swore to defend the valley. He was not alone. From the eastern hills came Dame Ysoria, a knight-errant cast out from her order, her shield battered, her honor stained by whispers she would not speak of. She found in Elias not merely a comrade, but the glimmer of hope she had thought long dead. From the northern forests emerged Kael the Seer, blind in both eyes, yet haunted by visions. His staff was carved with runes older than kings, and he alone seemed to understand the true nature of the war. To him, the black crosses were no mere zealots. They were the embodiment of a prophecy older than stone. Together they gathered the scattered, peasants, thieves, monks who still clung to faith. They called themselves the Children of Dawn. They were few and their weapons crude, yet in their eyes burned the defiance of those who would not let the sun be extinguished. The first clash came at dusk upon the fields of Nareth. The Children of Dawn, barely 300 in number, faced a tide of 2,000 black crosses. The air was heavy with the stench of crows, the sky bruised with clouds. Elias stood at the front, axe in hand, heart thundering like a drum. Beside him, Dame Ysoria raised her sword, its edge glinting like a shard of morning light. And behind them, Kael lifted his staff, whispering words no tongue had uttered in centuries. When the black crosses advanced, they did not march, they glided, as though the earth itself carried them forward. Their chant rolled like thunder, low, ceaseless, without breath. Elias swung his axe into the first of them, cleaving flesh that felt not flesh, but stone. The revenant fell, only to rise again with the help of circling crows. Ysoria struck another, her blade severing head from neck, yet the body staggered still, clutching for her like a marionette with broken strings. It was Kael who turned the tide, if only for a heartbeat. Planting his staff into the soil, he cried out, "Light remembers, light endures!" From the earth burst a radiance that burned the crows from the sky, scattering them in shrieks. For the first time the black crosses faltered, and in that breath Elias roared like a lion and struck again, his axe biting true. The Children of Dawn held the field that night, though at terrible cost. Half their number lay dead, their bodies pale beneath the moon. Yet as dawn broke, the survivors wept not in despair, but in awe, for they had withstood the unwithstandable. But the Veiled One does not sleep. From his camp of shadows he gazed upon the field of Nareth, and though he spoke no word, a silence fell that crushed even the bravest heart. His followers trembled not in fear, but in reverence, for they knew what his silence meant. The war was only begun. And so the tale of the black crosses spread, carried by fire and whisper, by fleeing peasants and trembling priests. Kingdoms that had long ignored the Valley of Ysoria now turned their eyes upon it, for they sensed that here, in this forgotten corner of the world, the fate of all dawns and all shadows would be decided. Thus ends the first chapter of that dread saga. The dawn that followed the slaughter of Nareth was pale and uncertain, as though the heavens themselves doubted whether to rise upon a world so marred. The air reeked of carrion, the once fertile fields were strewn with broken bodies and black feathers, and the silence that hung above them was more dreadful than any war cry. Yet among that ruin the Children of Dawn endured, few in number, battered in spirit, yet not extinguished. Elias stood with his axe heavy in his blistered hands, his gaze fixed upon a horizon dark with smoke. Words failed him, for what tongue could give voice to the enormity of what they had seen? Dame Ysoria, her armor dented and her shield notched, sat apart, cleaning her sword with slow, deliberate motions, her eyes haunted by a fire that seemed always to consume her. Kael the Seer, blind yet never sightless, whispered fragments of prophecy no one dared to interrupt, his staff laid across his knees like the weight of an age. At last the seer raised his hollow gaze to the sky and declared that the storm had not yet fallen. What they had faced at Nareth was but a tremor, the prelude to a cataclysm that would shake all kingdoms and leave the earth itself to weep blood. And as his words spread among the weary, fear and wonder alike began to stir, for none could say whether the blind one spoke truth or madness. Yet his voice, cracked as it was, rang with a certainty deeper than faith, and Elias felt a chill settled in his bones. Word of the children's defiance traveled faster than any raven. It crossed rivers and mountains, carried in the mouths of peasants fleeing with terror still clinging to their eyes. They spoke of a farmer who had struck down the unkillable, of a knight whose blade gleamed like the first morning, of a blind prophet who had called light from the earth. Their tale, embroidered and twisted, reached the halls of kings. Some rulers trembled upon jeweled thrones and muttered that perhaps dawn itself had taken form in these few. Others scoffed, declaring them madmen and heretics. Yet all listened, for rumor, once freed, cannot be chained. From the east, the kingdom of Vale sent soldiers, though not out of courage, but out of fear. From the frozen north came hunters clad in furs, bearing axes forged from obsidian, their faces hard as their mountains. From the burning south came monks scarred by fasting, men who claimed their order had foreseen this war in dreams etched upon their flesh. And so a patchwork host gathered around Elias, a tide of faith and suspicion mingled. Hope shone in their campfires, but so too did doubt, and whispers of betrayal crept among them. Some mocked Kael, blind yet leading. Others eyed Ysoria with contempt, the stain of her exile forever marking her. Even Elias, who sought no crown, felt the burden of command press upon his shoulders, heavier than iron. Word of the children's defiance traveled faster than any raven. It crossed rivers and mountains, carried in the mouths of peasants fleeing with terror still clinging to their eyes. They spoke of a farmer who had struck down the unkillable, of a knight whose blade gleamed like the first morning, of a blind prophet who had called light from the earth. Their tale, embroidered and twisted, reached the halls of kings. Some rulers trembled upon jeweled thrones and muttered that perhaps dawn itself had taken form in these few. Others scoffed, declaring them madmen and heretics. Yet all listened, for rumor, once freed, cannot be chained. From the east, the kingdom of Vale sent soldiers, though not out of courage, but out of fear. From the frozen north came hunters clad in furs, bearing axes forged from obsidian, their faces hard as their mountains. From the burning south came monks scarred by fasting, men who claimed their order had foreseen this war in dreams etched upon their flesh. And so a patchwork host gathered around Elias, a tide of faith and suspicion mingled. Hope shone in their campfires, but so too did doubt, and whispers of betrayal crept among them. Some mocked Kael, blind yet leading. Others eyed Ysoria with contempt, the stain of her exile forever marking her. Even Elias, who sought no crown, felt the burden of command press upon his shoulders, heavier than iron. Far away, in a fortress hewn of black stone that seemed to bleed shadow, the Veiled One prepared. His army needed neither rest nor bread, for the crows sustained them, and the silence within their master bound them together. Yet the Veiled One hungered still, not for land or wealth, but for the unmaking of light itself. Upon an altar of bones, beneath a moon veiled in eclipse, he performed the rite of ashes. His followers knelt by the thousands in unbroken silence as he lifted a chalice filled with the ichor of the slain. From it rose not smoke, but a living shadow, vast wings that blotted the stars. And when he drank, the earth groaned as if wounded. That night, the dead of 3 kingdoms rose from their graves. Farmers who had perished in famine, forgotten soldiers, maidens drowned in rivers, all walked once more beneath the banner of the Black Cross. His army swelled beyond counting, and despair rode before it like a herald. In the camp of the Children of Dawn, unrest grew. Some demanded retreat into the mountains to preserve what little hope remained. Others urged immediate assault to strike the Veiled One before his dominion became absolute. Ysoria's voice cut through the tumult like steel. Better to die with sword in hand than to live in cowardice. If dawn was to fade, let it fade amidst defiance. But Kael counseled otherwise, warning that not all light came through the sword. Somewhere, hidden and ancient, was a key older than silence, older even than the shadow that stalked them. If they fought blindly, they would walk into the mouth of night itself. Elias, torn between counsel, felt his heart falter. He was no king, no prophet, no knight blessed by order. He was but a farmer's son, yet every gaze turned to him. And so, trembling but resolute, he declared they would march. Not only to fight, but to seek the key of which Kael spoke. For dawn belonged not to warriors alone, but to all who dared hope. Their march brought them to the Vale of Ardenth, a valley once crowned with white towers, now ruined, their stones blackened as though by fire from the heavens. There they faced the host of the Black Crosses in its fullness. First came the crows, an ocean of wings that extinguished the sun. Then the endless dead, marching in dreadful unity. And at their center rode the Veiled One, his bone mask pale as death, silent as the grave. When the 2 armies met, the clash was cataclysm. Elias cleaved skulls with his axe, yet each foe struck down rose again. Ysoria carved a path of fury, yet for every 10 she slew, 20 pressed upon her. The ground grew slick with blood, the air thick with rot and ash. Kael planted his staff and cried words older than stars, and from the cliffs burst torrents of light, burning crows from the sky, turning revenants to ash. For a heartbeat, darkness faltered, hope rose. But the Veiled One lifted his hand, and the light withered. From the chasms below rose giants of bone and shadow, faceless titans wielding weapons of smoke, their steps shaking the earth, their roars drowning all prayer. The Children of Dawn broke. Many fled, many perished. Ysoria fought on, her shield shattered, her arm bleeding, her voice raw with cries of defiance. Elias, surrounded by ruin, felt despair claw at his soul. Then Kael seized his hand and whispered not of victory, but of the seed, the hidden root of light that survives even in ruin. And with that, the seer hurled himself before the Veiled One, his staff blazing with a final radiance. The explosion split sky from earth, scattering crows, collapsing giants, blinding all who beheld it. When the dust cleared, Kael was gone. Night fell upon the Vale of Ardenth. The children of dawn, broken and scattered, counted their dead. Of hundreds, scarcely a few dozen remained. Ysoria wept openly, her sword useless in her trembling grasp. Elias stood hollow-eyed, the weight of survival heavier than death. The Veiled One endured. His mask, unbroken, gleamed through the haze, his silence more dreadful than any scream. Though shaken, he had not fallen. He turned and vanished into shadow, his army receding like a tide, leaving only ruin. But in Elias's hand lay a fragment of Kael's shattered staff, faintly glowing with warmth, pulsing as though alive. And as he stared into its dim light, he felt no triumph, not even hope, but a single truth. The war was far from over, and the price of dawn would be greater than any soul could bear. The days after the Vale of Ardenth passed in silence heavier than the clash of swords. The children of dawn wandered like ghosts among the ruins, their steps slow, their voices broken, for every man and woman carried a grief too vast to speak. The fires of battle had gone out, yet the smoke lingered in their hearts. Ysoria, who once stood unshaken amidst storms, now walked alone at dusk, whispering prayers for the fallen, though she confessed no god had ever answered her. Elias bore the fragment of Kael's staff as one might bear a newborn child, fragile and radiant, its pulse a faint reminder that all was not yet swallowed by shadow. But it was not hope that filled their nights. It was the question. Why fight at all when darkness seemed endless? Why stand when all who stood before had been broken? And it was in that questioning that a strange strength began to grow. For doubt is not the death of faith, but its beginning. When they reached the river Saranth, they met villagers fleeing with only ashes in their hands. Their homes had burned, their kin taken by the Black Cross. They asked Elias not for swords or miracles, but for meaning. Why should they endure when every dawn was devoured by night? And Elias, weary and ragged, spoke not as a warrior, nor as a leader, but as a man who had bled and wept beside them. We are not dawn itself, he told them, but we are its memory. The Veiled One may swallow the sun, but he cannot unmake the memory of light. Each of you carries it. When you choose kindness over cruelty, when you lift the fallen instead of passing them by, when you speak truth though it costs you dearly, that is dawn. That is what he fears. For swords rust and kings fall, but the choice to love, even in the shadow, cannot be broken. The word spread, carried not by heralds, but by those who had nothing left but their own breath. And though no crown was set upon Elias's head, people began to call him not farmer nor warrior, but bearer of the dawn. Ysoria, standing at his side, found her exile forgotten, for in service to the light she had found a home greater than any kingdom. And Kael, though gone, lived on in the fragment of his staff, a reminder that sacrifice is the truest prophecy. The Veiled One was not defeated. His shadow still moved across the land, his silence still swallowed many. Yet where he passed, he found not only fear, but defiance. Peasants who refused to bow, mothers who sang their children to sleep though the night pressed at their doors, men and women who faced death with eyes unclouded. It was not an army of blades that rose against him, but an army of hearts that would not yield. And so the war did not end, but it changed. It ceased to be a battle of kingdoms and became a struggle written in every choice, every act of mercy, every refusal to surrender to cruelty. Dawn, they realized, was not a victory to be won once, but a vow to be kept each day, as fragile and as fierce as the first light breaking over the world. Elias, standing upon a hill where grass had begun to grow through the ashes, looked upon the horizon where shadow and sunrise met. His hands trembled, his scars burned, yet within him stirred not triumph, but peace. For he understood at last, no man can promise that darkness will vanish, but every soul can promise not to let it rule them. That promise was dawn. That promise was worth dying for, and more, it was worth living for.